Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program tonight, sponsored by the DC Caucus of Emory Black Alumni. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have an exciting program and discussion featuring our very own alumna, Candace Bacchus Hollingsworth. But before we get started, let me just give some few introductions. My name is Layla Bukhari, and I'm a graduate of Emory University. I obtained my Bachelor of Science degree from Emory undergrad, and then went on to pursue my Master of Public Health degree at Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. And I'm currently an alumni volunteer with the DC Caucus of Emory Black Alumni, and I'm proud to serve as the president here of SEBA in DC. I'm working with my fellow volunteers to connect alumni to the university and to each other, build traditions, foster student and alumni leadership, and work to serve the diverse needs and interests of our community. So I'm very, very excited to bring you tonight conversation as DC SEBA's Black History Month program. So welcome to February, it's almost over. We've survived so far in 2021. Before we begin our official program with our amazing guests that we have, I'd just like to cover some brief basics of tonight's webinar. The chat feature is disabled for this program, but please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A function at any time, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be posted for viewing later on the Emory Collective. And before we begin, I want to take a quick moment to just provide some brief updates on the DC Caucus of Emory Black Alumni. So our goal here is to host at least one program per quarter. We've had a few events in the last few months. In October, we sponsored an event with Rollins School of Public Health. And in January, we also co-sponsored an event with the DC Emory Alumni Association with the Emory Women's Group. So that was great. And if anybody has any ideas for future programs, if you want to be a panelist or if you're an expertise, please reach out to me. Secondary, we do have civic dinners, which is the opportunity and a platform where you could be a host to discuss any topic of your choice, whether it's the economy, voting rights, food equity, racism, racial injustice, politics, spirituality. So we bring together people for meaningful conversation that spark real and lasting change. So if you want to hear about that, then please go ahead and go to civicdinners.com/Emory, and you'll find out more information about that. So stay tuned. Just a quick update, we do have a communications chair now, Ashley Stewart. So I do want to thank her for stepping up to volunteer for that. You'll be hearing from some more future email correspondences from me about updates, programs, and announcements. So stay tuned. And now to everybody's favorite part of the event, I am honored to have us join today, our featured speaker, where we're going to have a nice discussion and answer questions. She's going to tell us about her new journey. And so I chose Candace, honorary Candace Bacchus Hollingsworth, who is an Emory University alumni. I chose her because I've known Candace since I was a freshman at Emory. So we attended Emory around the same time. And she was very welcoming to me, very nice. She held a lot of leadership positions on campus. She was in government, just a prominent leader on Emory's campus. And last year, I actually had the opportunity to reconnect with her in February 2020 in Hyattsville, where she was hosting a SEBA Emory alumni event right there in her own town in Hyattsville when she was the mayor. So it was a nice intimate event, and I got to reconnect with her after not seeing her for a few years. So I felt like she was the ideal guest for Black History Month, because she's just been always, since I've known her, somebody who believes in rights and Black agenda and politics and just a fighter for justice and Blacks. And I really think that she'd be a great guest. So I reached out to her. And so I do want to thank you, Candace, for offering your time to come and speak to us today. Now, before we begin, you have amassed a great number of accomplishments and successes. So I just want to introduce you to our stage. Candace Hollingsworth, or honorary Candace Bacchus Hollingsworth, is the national co-chair of Our Black Party, which is a political organization that was established to help lead a national agenda to create lasting change in the everyday lives of Black people nationwide. So most recently, Candace served as mayor of Hyattsville. She stepped down in December 2020 to focus and grow Our Black Party. However, Candace was the first African-American mayor in the city's 134-year history. So you can see she's making further changes, creating history. She was also the youngest mayor in the 134-year history, and she's a great passionate advocate for cities, youth, and stronger democracy. So we're going to learn more about how she's the co-chair of the Our Black Party and hear more about her opportunities and how she's expanding that. And so, a native Memphian, Candace holds a Bachelor of Arts in African American Studies from Emory and a Master of Public Policy from Georgetown. She's a board member for Prince George's County African American Museum and Culture Center. She's a part of Sisters on the Planet for Oxfam America, and she's a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. So thank you so much for being here, Candace. I'm so happy to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation. I want to say to folks, this is real life. So we're both of us are coming to you from our homes. So if you hear a few creaks and all of that stuff, just kind of ignore it, pretend like it didn't happen. Sorry, Steve, for the production.
Good to see you again. Thank you I know you're a very, very busy lady, so I do appreciate the time that you've invested and taken to participate in this program for our Black History Month event. And I felt like you were also the perfect person because you're local here in the DMV area. So I'll go ahead and get started with a few questions, and please feel free to just answer as you feel so. So you made history by being the first woman the youngest and the first African-American woman mayor of Hyattsville, which is amazing. So just like your fellow sorority sister, you're breaking barriers. Kamala Harris is your sorority sister, the first African-American, East Asian, and woman vice president. So similar to your sorority sister. So you transitioned to being the national co-chair of Our Black Party. Now, I first heard about this political organization leading up to the 2020 elections. Now, before we get into the details of this political committee, tell me the motivation and your inspiration for retiring from mayor and transitioning into this new role.
Yeah, so, the decision to leave my role as mayor is probably one of the most difficult ones I've made because I'd been in elected office up until that point, until December. I guess, 9.5 years at that point. I was mayor for close to 6 and was on the council for 4 years before running for mayor. So that's a long time. And it's a long time at one of probably the most formative, decades of our lives. You're going from late 20s to late 30s now. And a lot of my identity, for better, for worse, have been wrapped up in what I did as a leader in this city, in this area, in this region. And, although Hyattsville is a small city, it is the neighbor to the nation's capital, and so there's a lot of implications for the policies that we pass at a local level. How they impact in our scene in the broader region is much wider than perhaps you might see for a smaller city in Indiana, just pick something. So when George Floyd was murdered last year, and still being in office at that time, a group of us, and by us, I mean other young elected officials, mostly Black, well, actually all Black elected officials, got together and we were thinking about, because we've always tossed around this idea, maybe we need our own party, because when you get fed up with the things and way things are going, you're like, we just need our own, but there's really no fire beneath it because it's kind of a fleeting idea. And then there's also the realization that it will be a really heavy lift to accomplish but last year it was more like, nah, we got to do this. And we had to do it not from the sense of, okay, it's just Democrats or it's just Republicans and we need something different, but rather, how do we create an organization or a reality where elected officials who care about equity or who lead with equity at the center of their agendas, Black, white, or otherwise, but definitely thinking about Black elected officials. How do we create a reality where they can go out and do whatever it is that's necessary for Black people in this country without fear that they're going to lose a donation, they're going to lose, significant number of votes they need to stay in office. There is no apparatus really that exists, no electoral apparatus that exists that really is making sure that we know what elected officials are actually doing for all of us in our respective communities. When we go to the ballot, we see D and R, we see blue and red. We don't necessarily know which candidate and where they stand on issues relevant to the Black agenda. So we said with our Black Party, we wanted to create an organization that gave not just a mandate to elected officials, and from the community, but also gave money, where we were like, if you go out there and you're committed to doing these things that the community has asked for, because we have, honestly, as elected officials, we have dropped the ball on what communities have asked of us to do. We have been meek. We have been hesitant to really go forward for whatever the reason might be. And it is time for us to really stand up and make sure that we're delivering on the promises that our communities, that we're making our communities by allowing us to be in office. So we wanted to give folks that backbone to be like, look, you go out and do what's necessary. We got you. Whether that's through fundraising, getting volunteers, helping you pass the policies as necessary. You shouldn't have to rely on other groups of folks in order to do what you know is necessary and right by your community.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you for that detailed answer. So what came to my mind when you said that, would you say that the devastating, I don't even know what word to use to describe that incident that happened, would you say that the George Floyd disparity in racism and traumatic event was the pivotal moment in your career as an elected official that said, you know what, I need to do something more, I need to do something greater? Would you say that that was the impetus that drove you to move into that direction? Or was this something that was brewing? Okay.
No, absolutely. It's always been brewing. So the activism piece has always been there for me. But sadly, I think it's great that now when folks are running for office, there's really no expectation that folks are polished to a certain degree, or that they have a certain degree or a certain level of accomplishments or anything like that. There's actually more of an expectation that the person has passion and values and inspiration that's actually driving them. When I first ran for office, the image that we saw of what it meant to be a Black elected official is very different from probably the standard image that people have now. And it's shifted a whole lot in just 10 years. But what that means is that there are still a number of us who were elected from the period, especially around the Obama years, right, who were elected during that time, that I'll just be frank, we're scared. We are not yet secure in the power that we wield in our offices, that we are willing to step out there and do what's necessary for Black folks. And I count myself in that group too, because although we can work behind the scenes and we're passing policies, we're making little, adjustments here and there to make sure that we're doing what's necessary, it's a little silent. Whereas right now, people are expected to be vocal. And I think for me, when George Floyd happened, it's like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot, and it had already been percolating for quite a while, but I was like, I cannot do this to where I am navigating this tightrope of being a Black elected official that's not entirely able to completely occupy my Blackness. And it was time for me to demonstrate something different. It was time for others in office to demonstrate something different. And it was also time for us to have an organization that provided some infrastructure and support to those of us who decided to do that. And I stepped down in December, honestly, because I just don't have all the bandwidth. I really wish I could do all the things, but being mayor is a part-time job. I'm working a full-time job. I'm a mom, and trying to help grow an organization, I had to make some difficult choices. And a lot of people will probably say, why would you choose to give up a title? The title doesn't matter to me. What matters more to me is what we're able to accomplish for more communities like mine across this country.
You touched on so many points and so many layers and aspects that I want to get into, such as passion, being a woman of color. There's so many things. Okay, so we're going to get to those, but I want to get specifically to our Black Party, which is amazing from what I've read about it. So I've seen that it's garnered support from celebrities such as Diddy, and prominent leaders such as like Virginia Commonwealth's attorney Stephanie Morales. How did you leverage your network to foster these connections? Can you tell me how this organization came to be, who launched it, things of that sort? Because I've heard and read conflicting things, but tell us more about the support and how our Black Party got started.
Yeah, so it's really important to acknowledge that there's nothing that we do alone ever. And this is no exception. One of the things that often happens with me is when I see people have a great idea and they want to do something, I'm like, sure, I'll help. And then somewhere, somehow I end up being kind of sort of in charge. I'm like, okay, I don't know how that happened, but all right. And so with our Black Party, there was a group of us, the 5 of us, including, which is vice chair, well, not vice, our co-chair, Wes Bellamy, who was vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia. Leah Webb, who is a former city councilor out of Binghamton, New York. Stephanie Morales, who you mentioned, who is a Commonwealth attorney for Portsmouth, Virginia. She's currently the Commonwealth attorney, and she's running for re-election this year, as well as Rashad Lambert, who is the founder of Forbes the Culture. And it's the 5 of us that kind of helped put a little bit of structure around this idea. And there's a much broader group of about 50 or so other Black elected officials across the country that we consider to be founding members. So there's really a broad base of people who recognize that there is a need for some collective action on behalf of elected officials, in addition to what's happening in communities with organizers and other movement builders across the country. And Wes, my co-chair, he has had a long time relationship, newly forming relationship with Diddy, and he expressed his support for what we were doing very early on. And he was one of our earliest, he is our earliest and most substantial financial contributor and donor to date. But it's important that we acknowledge that, celebrity, of course, brings an entirely different set of things, and it allows an organization to reach a larger number of eyes than we probably would have, if we were still kind of trudging along. And that's a blessing. And it comes with consequences. And one of those consequences is that, people see a big name and they're like, oh, they did that, they're doing this. There's an expectation that you're ready to go and shoot off like a rocket right then. And that's not the way organizing works. That's not the way electoral politics works. You really have to till the soil and create an environment so that your organization can sustain itself. And so this moment that we're in right now is a reset of sorts, where we're able to kind of grow deliberately so that we can be an organization that stays around for the long term, and that we can meet some really clear and important priorities over the next year. The presidential election, that wasn't our race. We got started in the summer. So to have an expectation that we were gonna, or mobilize millions of voters around a particular presidential candidate that had already been decided, that's crazy. So what we are seeing, and where we see the real value of our Black Party, is actually not in the presidential races. It's important. The real value is in communities, local and state races, where often people are even more disconnected than they are from the federal races, but yet those policies that are passed locally are those that have the greatest impacts on our everyday lives. So we are trying to make sure that we pay attention to those local races, that we help elect candidates that are actually supportive of the Black agenda, that we help educate those community members on exactly what the policy process looks like right in their communities, so that they, as they mature in their involvement and their civic engagement, that they end up wanting to be involved in federal elections. And whoever is elected there, that's just a cherry on the top. That we're not relying on Congress, on the Congress, the House and the Senate, to ensure that we have the protections that we deserve, but rather that we're creating that reality right at home.
That's a good point, that it starts at home. It starts with the local and community efforts. That's a very good point that you brought up, that sometimes we tend to neglect. We tend to focus so much on the bigger picture, the presidential election, that we tend to neglect those very, very integral and important local elections, like we saw with the Georgia runoffs that we had in January, that thankfully, you know, was successful. So with the help of Stacey Abrams and things of that sort. So there's tons of questions that I do want to get to. I do have a question from an audience member that goes alongside with what we're talking about. So I have a question from the audience that says, what do you believe is the biggest challenge affecting the African-American community today?
So right now, I would say the thing that should be on our radar and that we pay closest attention to is restoring Voting Rights Act. And actually improving upon Voting Rights Act. So what we're seeing in Georgia right now, where there are so many bills, and across the country, actually, there are 42 states that have since the 2020 elections that have put forth and that have proposed legislation that's designed to restrict voting rights in their respective states in their elections. And that is just an indicator of how important, how valuable the vote is, every single vote. And they're focusing in particular on the ways that Black people tend to vote, and the ways, and not just the ways that Black people tend to vote, but the ways that organizers work to help get Black folks to the polls and to make voting more accessible, to make democracy more accessible. So it's important. I think that's one of the things that we need to pay attention to. And also redistricting, those kind of go hand in hand. You know, we just completed the 2020 census. And so the population and demographics and the way things are dispersed across the country and within districts is going to determine our representation, not just in Congress, but also how your city council districts are organized, how your state house districts are organized. Right now, we have close to 60% of Black folks in this country live in 10 states. And 5 of those 10 states, every level of the state legislature, so the House, the Senate, or the General Assembly, whatever the name is, House, Senate, and Governor are all Republican. Now, that's not to say that, you know, one party is necessarily better or worse, but what happens with Republican-led legislatures, we're talking about probably, you know, there half of those states where significant populations of Black folk live are led by folks that are determined to keep us from the polls, to restrict our voice in a number of ways. And so I am, you know, our Black Party, we are really looking forward to, at least on the federal level, one of the things that we're going to be paying attention to is the progression of HR 1 and S1 through the House and the Senate, which is the For the People Act. It is probably, in my opinion, the most consequential piece of voting rights legislation to pass since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's going to have really broad consequences. It's also going to show who is really committed to equity, who is really committed to making sure that we have a democracy in this country, and who's really committed to making sure that what happened on January 6th, there's no room for that to happen again. So those are the things that I think they go hand in hand, that are probably most important for us to pay attention to right now.
Perfect, because I was actually going to ask you, outside of the attendee question, that, you know, I had recently seen in the news about Georgia introducing legislation to try and basically suppress the Black vote, essentially. So I was going to ask you your thoughts of that and your opinion. So that's perfect that you touched upon that. So I'm glad you hit upon that. But you guys, all of our guests, Candace is touching on some really, really important points, on some things that we could take home and that we could further take into our communities and act upon. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a perfect perfect example of how we need to get more involved in our local state and state elections and legislature. So I'm glad that our Black Party is working on that, because that was something that I was afraid of, that I had already seen. And I'm glad that you brought it up, that it's not just happening in Georgia, because all I've seen is just Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. But as you guys can see, that it's happening in dozens of other states in America. So we need to pay attention to just more than Georgia and look at other states, because you can see that they really see how powerful our vote is. So thank you for that. And so going along those lines, outside of voter suppression and voter rights, what other things is our Black Party focusing upon? What are some other things that their agenda, the purpose of our Black Party? If you could just expand upon those.
Yeah, sure. So the agenda, when we talk about a Black agenda, that's often the first question that people have. Is like, is there a Black agenda? Because by saying that, it gives the impression that there's this one thing that everybody sat around the table and agreed upon. We know that's not reality. We have adopted as an agenda, as a framework for the work that we are doing, the Black Agenda 2020, which was developed by Black to the Future Action Fund. Black to the Future Action Fund is a kind of like a sibling organization to Black Futures Lab, which is an organization that was started by Alicia Garza, one of the 3 co-founders of Black Lives Matter Global Network. And Black Agenda was developed based on the Black census that they did in 2018, which was it was the first of its kind since Reconstruction, which was essentially a survey of, I believe they had nearly 40,000 Black folks that they surveyed to see what were the most pressing issues to that community. And what developed was an agenda that touched on a number of domains in our lives. It's democracy, it's our communities, our families, health, and in the economy. What are the policy priorities for Black folks in each of those domains, that if we were to take this to a president, a legislator, a mayor, a council member, what are the things that they can do to make Black people powerful in this country across all of those areas? And it is robust in the sense that there's so much to be done. And so for our Black Party, we are looking at it as, okay, this is how we're operating. We're looking at all of these different areas. What do we know that there is widespread support for? And then how can we help support local elected officials or those aspiring to office to actually implement policies that support those things? Doesn't say that this thing over here is more important than the other. It's just that overall, our desire is to improve the quality of life for Black folks. There's oftentimes when people are voting for a candidate, they're like, I ain't seen no difference. I mean, what's gonna change in my everyday life? And we want to be like, okay, these are the things that, protections for domestic workers. Okay, you might not be a domestic worker, but there are many who are. And so when we pass policies that support domestic workers, we are supporting a segment of the Black community that deserves to have protections, that deserves to have some dignity in the work that they're doing, and to be assured that there are elected officials who are responsive to their needs. And I am hoping that Black folks, that we can look at an agenda in that way. Acknowledge that we're not going to agree or let alone even understand every piece of it. But if we lead from the perspective of, if the goal is to improve folks' quality of life, it is there because somebody's life is going to be better because of it. So let's get behind that. Let's work with the common agenda and at least know that we're marching towards the same place, although we may have some very heated arguments and disagreement on exactly how to do it.
Awesome. Thank you. And speaking of agreement and disagreement and federal laws and things of that sort, something I had learned about recently, which kind of startled me and made me a little bit upset, was our President Biden talking about student loans, for instance, and how we thought when he was running, he was going to, forgive at least $50,000, perhaps in an executive order. And, I've seen lately, and I'm sure you have too, that he said a statement that says, oh, I don't feel like elitist schools should have their loans forgiven, XYZ. And he shifted his discussion about, okay, well, maybe we'll just forgive 10,000. So the part that bothered me, I'll say, and rifled my, feathers, was the fact that he said elitist schools, essentially, basically, he said they don't deserve to have their student loans forgiven. And I was thinking, you're a student of Emory, I'm a student of Emory. We know that all walks of life come through Emory, all types of socioeconomic status. And so not everybody who went to a school such as Emory can just have their, no, I'm not going to have my loans forgiven. So what are your thoughts on that? And is there anything that our Black Party is doing to discuss further about that loan situation? And what are some ways in which you think that us as an Emory alumni, or even our Black Party, can do to rectify or fix that loan situation with President Biden?
I could talk about this topic for a long time. So let's say this about Biden, President Biden. He's consistent. He has always said that he has always said $10,000 as though that was the biggest gift he could possibly give. Perhaps $10,000 would have been helpful for someone who attended college in the 1960s. It is not sufficient for someone who has graduated from college in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it also demonstrates how little he understands about racial equity and about Black folks. I actually wrote an op-ed, hasn't yet been published, wrote an op-ed about this last week. When we are, because we're talking to Emory alumni, I know y'all understand. When I was deciding to go to college, I initially had plans of getting a Lou Rawls scholarship and then going to Hampton. I had no idea that the scholarships from UNCF, you had to go to an HBCU. I didn't, those aren't things I researched. I just remember watching what was it called? Parade of Stars. I don't remember what it was called. It was the little thing that came on TV all the time. And I was like, I'm gonna get one of those because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And so I knew for certain I was gonna get one. But then when I graduated high school, when it was time for me to apply to schools, there was a college counselor in particular. I ended up going to a boarding school for high school in New England, mostly white. There were 52 Black kids there, out of right 1,100. And this college counselor told me, I took her the list of schools that I, researched, and I was like, I wanted to go to these, and they ran the gamut. Mostly, they were all predominantly white institutions, because at this point, I just explored more. I knew a little bit more. I wasn't making a value judgment on one or the other. It was just like, oh, there are so many other institutions I can choose from. And I gave her this list, and she said, oh, you probably need to set your sights a little bit lower.
Of course.
And it was because she said that I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to apply to all these schools.
Right. I'm going to show you.
And there are probably a lot of people for whom racism has propelled them into institutions that set them up for years of debt, right? Now, add on top of that, getting to Emory. And Emory was probably the school that gave me the lowest package for financial aid. Emory as an institution itself, sorry, Steve, had at the time, I'm still I'm true to form. Still at that time had a provision, I don't know if it still exists, around non-custodial parent contribution. And so when you add on top racism from high school and the way that people perceived your success or your ability, combine that with getting to an undergraduate institution And there's this expectation that your other parent who doesn't live with you, if your parents are divorced, that they are going to contribute to your education. Not understanding that my mom at the time was a single mom. She was the only person able to contribute to my education. So when you say that the non-custodial parent has to contribute $5,000, you're saying my mama's got to pay $5,000.
Right.
So add that on top. So now we got to make up that gap with loans. Then you get into trying to build a life or post-college, and programs like Peace Corps, Teach for America, AmeriCorps generally, that have great programs that allow you to get loan forgiveness and, have a certain amount of your loans forgiven after so many years of service. You still have to be in a position for somebody to help support your lifestyle while you're doing those programs. Okay. And if you're a student from a family of limited means, like I was, those programs are not an option for me. Those programs are options to people who already have enough. And so to say that students like us, like me, who have gone to institutions like Emory, whatever you think of them, that means you don't understand all of the dynamics and the ways that we actually have internalized oppression to the point where we seek out institutions like the elite institution because we're told that that's what we have to do in order to get the good job, in order to get the foot in the door, in order to succeed. We're told to do that. And so now it's like, oh, actually, nah, not gonna help you. It is infuriating. You can't tell.
I was really pissed off.
It is infuriating for me. And I think for the ways that we can be involved, because, just to be candid, he never promised he would do the 50,000. That was, on the sides of folks like Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Congresswoman Presley, bless her heart. Like she, and I don't mean that in the Southern way, I mean that like really bless her heart. She is a great person. Continuing to support their calls for that, continuing to beat the drum, continuing to share your stories. There's so much around, I think that we have a collective silence on our experience in institutions, in predominantly white institutions, to where people don't really get to see all of the textures of the Black experience. And the more that we share our stories, the more that we can add to that chorus of people who be like, no, this is necessary. It will spur the economy. I spend $989 a month on student loans, $989 a month on student loans. And that's on the income-based plan. That's not counting my husband's loans. And every month, my student loan balance goes up by $51.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
That's money I'm literally throwing out the window.
Throwing out the window, not making any dents, and not stimulating the economy at all.
At all.
Adding more to the burden of racial and economic inequalities and injustice and disparities. It doesn't make any sense. And it's very frustrating. It was very frustrating to hear that. Along those lines, so what do you think us as Emory Black alumni, what can we do to help? Because it seems like, a lot of people or some people tend to be just out of touch with these type of things, which is why we have to start with the local and community level. So what can we do as Emory alumni? And this was similar to a question that was asked in the Q&A chat. What can we do as alumni to help with that situation or get the word out and things that we could do?
Yeah, so for our Black Party in particular, of course, we want folks to join, to sign up. Like I said, we are growing slowly and deliberately. So, want to kind of set expectations there on that. But in terms of helping support, there are a number of petitions out there. Get on the mailing list for Congresswoman Presley and signing any of their petitions. She currently has a resolution out for a federal jobs guarantee. Continue to beat the drum about the need for student loan reform and also broad student loan forgiveness. And so I think those are the areas that are most important for people to get active. I know there's a change.org petition, but also call your legislators where you live and call those in those moderate districts, just to say, I'm a constituent over here, but when folks are in office at the federal level, they represent all of us. And people have such narrow views of what it's like to be a student, because let's face it, when you look at the median age of folks in Congress, it has been so long since they had to pay for school. They might be paying for their kids' educations, but they're just so divorced from that problem, and it really is taking the hard work of the younger members of Congress to really push this forward. And they need all of us to continue sharing those stories, because otherwise it is considered to be a handout. It's considered to be an entitlement. There's also a perception that there won't be stimulation of the economy. So in sharing your stories, it's also important to share what you would do with the extra money, right? So for me, because when economists are talking about the value and the merit of broad student loan forgiveness, they often say, and I'm not an economist, I just read the things. So those of you who are economists, you can weigh in differently, but they often say that by having a program like this, that it will end up causing inflation, because the people that it will benefit at that highest level are folks who are more prone to save rather than those who are prone to spend. I know in my case, yeah, I would save a portion, but I would also be doing things, being a bit more active in the local economy in different ways, and so it's important to share that reality that we restrict our spending because of you have to pay, $989 a month on student loan payments that end up having you have to pay.
That takes 30 years to just pay them off.
Yeah, so it's important in sharing your story to also talk about what that means for you and for your family, because there is a perception about our behaviors as it relates to spending that then encourages the way that they make analyses on the impact of these programs on the broader economy.
Thank you. That's very insightful and helpful. Now, speaking of our Black Party specifically, how can somebody, the community, Emory alumni, how can we get involved in our Black Party? Because this sounds really awesome. It sounds like it's focusing on disparities in our community, racial injustice, economic issues, health disparities. How can somebody get involved?
Yeah, so like I said, the first thing is to sign up at ourblackparty.org. We are in the process of appointing state directors. Like I said, when we talked about, nearly 60% of Black folks in the country reside in 10 states. Our focus for this year is on building the network in those 10 states. So if you live in, if you live in Florida, Mississippi, Maryland, Texas, New York, Georgia, California, North Carolina, Illinois, and Ohio, those are the 10 states that we are focusing on this year. If you know of candidates, whether they're in those states or not, because we also want to do candidate support, because like I said, we want those elected officials to feel that they have support behind them to do the work that's necessary. If you know folks that are running for office that you think we should have on our radar, that will, that need to have support, whether it is in financial support or even just having a coalition of other folks that can help them craft policy and think about ways to improve their platforms for Black folks. Definitely, you can email me directly, Candace at ourblackparty.org. And if you know of folks that are in office, preparing to run, if there are certain races where you're like, I would love to see us get behind this, this person, just send those things, because our data and our database is only as good as the network that we built around it. So the more information you can share with us, likewise, if there's somebody that needs to go, and we need to start identifying candidates for certain races, those are things that are important too. So always err on the side of, I want to inform somebody about this, because that allows us to help develop and refine our strategy and how we're approaching the electoral cycle for this upcoming couple of years.
Awesome, that was very helpful, thank you. So I'll go to asking a question from the group. So one area of focus on Our Black Party agenda is defunding the police, which received a lot of attention during the 2020 election campaign and after President Biden's win. What are your thoughts about the current discussions on this issue, particularly how many on the right are purposefully misinterpreting it to stoke fear by saying crime will be rampant and we will be more unsafe?
You know, what's unfortunate is that not only are folks on the right misrepresenting it, folks on the left are allowing that disagreement or misunderstanding, whatever you want to call it, to make them scared. Like there's a local official here who made a post the other day, Black man in one of our county positions, that made a post saying, we don't all believe in defunding police. What good does that do? What good does that do? Because actually, all of us, in my opinion, probably do believe in defunding police. Why? Because we all believe that community services are important. We all believe that mental health is important. We all believe that youth programs and recreation is important. We all believe that those things actually should have priority in our communities. It's just that some people believe that the badge should not be disrespected by happening to say, we shouldn't fund you this year, or we shouldn't fund you for the next couple of years. Everyone knows what is being said by defund police. People just don't want to be attached to something that they think is a grenade. And when they're doing that, they're only doing it to protect their seats. And I have more problems with people on the left that do that than I do with folks on the right. I expect the folks on the right to have opposition to it. But it reminds me of back in 2014 when people were scared to say Black Lives Matter. It's only recently when elected officials, Black or otherwise, actually became comfortable saying Black Lives Matter. But in 2014, it was like, nope, it's untouchable. I'm not going to say it. It's the same thing with defund police. And what it is, I know everyone on this call likely understands, this is about saying, should law enforcement be the first line of defense for our community's problems? Absolutely not. Are we supposed to use policing as a solution to the things that we actually have the ability to fund and create a social safety net around? No, it shouldn't. And so sometimes that means choosing to invest in the areas where you know you're going to have the broadest and greatest impact on future generations than on someone's sense of safety. In Hyattsville, I often told folks, they would say, we need to add more money to the police department because it's going to help keep us safe. There is no amount of money that can satisfy your need for safety. It's insatiable. We're always going to crave to feel more safe. There is, so I can't satisfy that. But what I can satisfy is a young person that feels like they are honored and protected. I can satisfy a young person that feels like they have things to do, that they feel that they are nurtured in an environment that contributes to their future success because they actually interact with it on a daily basis. Majority of folks don't interact with police on a daily basis, yet that's where the majority of their money goes.
Right.
And so I just, sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but like I said, I take more issue with folks on the proverbial left that choose to continue to allow people to intentionally misrepresent what defund police means.
Thank you, that's helpful. I was actually going to ask you, what is some challenges that our Black Party might face in 2021? And it seems like you mentioned one, having some opposition from people on the left who you would not anticipate or not expect, and more anticipate or expect that from the other side. So that's one challenge and that you feel that we may face. And for our guests, please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A. We're about to wrap up in a few minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. But in the meantime, what are some other challenges that specifically maybe in 2021 that our Black Party might face? And how can we help you other than getting involved and signing up and emailing you? What are some challenges? And we're here to support you and we want to move this forward. So how can we help?
So I really appreciate you and the Emory Office of Emory Alumni and Steve's team for really creating this platform for us to have this conversation and to be able to highlight and amplify what our Black Party intends to do. For 2021, I mean, I want to be realistic. The thing that is probably going to be the greatest challenge is that we're still recovering from COVID. And not just what that means economically and how that impacts folks' ability to give and support candidates, but organizing is hand-to-hand combat. Like there is certainly digital organizing and, Facebook and Instagram and all of that, but it's still about the ways that people can connect to their community members face to face. And so building that network, we're, of course, going to have to invest in digital organizing and doing that, but it's also just a reality that the opportunities that might be presented for in-person interaction are going to be limited. And I think that's going to impact the ways that how robust the network can be in this year in particular. But I think we'll be able to do a bit more in 2022.
Awesome. Thank you. Last question before we wrap up. What recommendations do you have for applicants who are on the brink of acceptance to Emory and are preparing to take on a considerable debt to attend Emory?
Look, I got to read that again.
Sure.
What recommendations do you have for applicants who are on the brink of acceptance? I remember when I was at Emory, and gosh, I wish I could remember her name. I can see her face. I can't remember her name. I was a freshman at Terman Hall, and she was a senior getting ready to graduate. This was freshman fall, and she said, "Don't take a job that's not going to pay you at least what you paid a year to go to Emory."
Very true. Oh, I wish I had known that.
And that was probably one of two important pieces of advice that I had as a student. And so I would say really, really make sure that Emory is the place for you. Mm-hmm. That it is the place in terms of you have the flexibility for majors, because I started out pre-med, but then I didn't go to biology class for a whole semester. So that kind of went out the window. But make sure you have the flexibility within the program or within university to navigate moments of indecisiveness or where you might change your mind, that you still have a program that is interesting and and feels fulfilling to you. And really, and think about what you want to do. And I would still say that same thing is what you want to do in life. Is the starting salary for that likely going to be what you're going to be making it or having to pay for Emory or having to pay for your loans? I'd look at that as a starting point. I wish I'd done that before. And there's a resource online. I wish I had the link where you can see the average starting salaries for universities across the country. And you can compare that. And again, with those who are on financial aid, and if there's the non-custodial thing, like I said, I don't know if that still exists, but if it does, appeal that thing over and over again. Appeal it until you have any more breath and be like, look, especially if you're in a single parent household, because that is an additional burden that goes to the parent that is caring for you. So work with the financial aid counselors to find a package that is going to be the best fit for you, and don't accept the first thing as the final thing, because there's always room for them to find more.
Awesome. Thank you. This has been such an amazing discussion. I learned so much. So thank you, Candace. Some key takeaways. Definitely, if you want to get involved with Candace and her Our Black Party organization, please go to ourblackparty.org. You can email her at candace@ourblackparty.org. Like she said, get involved in your local and your community organizations. We need to really push this student loan forgiveness and reform. Congresswoman Presley, who I was watching almost every day last month, and all the hard work she was doing on TV every day, in and out. I was just amazed at what all of them were doing with the devastating effects of January 6th. So call your local legislation, share your stories, some key takeaways that I got from Candace. What would you do extra? Push for these local candidates, because like Candace said, 60% of Blacks live in these 10 states who have Republican leaders. So we need to push for those, as Candace mentioned, some of those states, Maryland, Florida, I think you mentioned Illinois, maybe Mississippi. So yes, get involved locally. So like here's on the screen, you can contact her at ourblackparty.org. Candace at ourblackparty.org. If you're interested in more ways to involve yourself in CEBA DC or CEBA on a whole, you can contact me at regionalnetworks@emory.edu. There's tons of other programs and recordings on emorycollective.com. So, you know, we thank you. Candace, I thank you so much for the gift of your time that you gave to not only just me, but everybody else who registered and attended. I know you're somebody busy. I'll definitely keep in touch. I hope more of you keep in touch with Candace and get involved specifically with this organization and donate and try and push the narrative that they're trying to push. Make sure you check your email and go to emorycollective.com. And last but not least, I'd also like to thank our staff support, Steve and Scott from the Alumni Association, for partnering on this event. And thank you to the other CEBA presidents in other cities who helped to get this event out there. Candace, for lending your insight and expertise, and not only just tonight, but even when I met with you a year ago, February, before COVID and the pandemic, and even back as I was an undergrad student at Emory, you have always been so warm and welcoming. So I'm really excited to see the future of what you're going to do with Our Black Party, and I thank you for your time. And at this point, do you have any parting words, Candace?
Yeah, I would like to say that, you know, at Emory is one of the places that I learned how important it was to take care of each other. I absolutely love the community that we had at Emory, and it's, you know, despite everything, it's one of my favorite memories about the institution. Even as alumni, remember that we still have the ability to be a community and to take care of one another. And when we're giving, you can say, I want my donations to go towards this purpose. Remember that we have that power also with our dollar to help establish, if there are things that we recognize when we were undergrad that we would have been great if undergraduates had this type of support, we can create that. As you know, as alumni, we can get behind that, and we can build a reality for Black students at Emory that we envisioned for ourselves when we were there. So let's continue to wield the power of community. Let's continue to take care of each other and recognize that we are all still brothers and sisters. That there is still a BSA even after
you were BSA, weren't you?
Yeah,
I remember that. I knew I was like Black Student Alliance. For some who might not remember, she was our Black Student Alliance president. Look at her now. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank
you
Layla.
guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you for the gift of your time, and everybody else who attended. If we appreciate it, and stay in touch, go to ourblackparty.org. Thank you guys, and have a great rest of your evening.